The cold morning wind whipped across Jai-Ho Park's face as he walked along the empty beach of Jeju Island. The sun had barely risen, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. As a marine biology graduate student, he loved these quiet morning hours when he could work without tourists getting in his way. Jai-Ho adjusted his thick jacket and checked his collection bags. He needed more seaweed samples for his research on ocean acidification. The whole beach was his laboratory now, with no one around for miles, just the way he liked it. The waves crashed against the dark rocks, creating a peaceful rhythm that he had grown to love over the past 2 years. His boots left deep prints in the wet sand as he moved between tide pools, carefully collecting specimens and taking notes on his waterproof tablet. Another quiet morning, he muttered to himself, carefully placing a particularly interesting piece of seaweed into his collection bag. But then something changed. A sound carried across the water, something he had never heard before. It was like a mix between a song and a cry for help, high-pitched and haunting. Jai-Ho straightened up, his heart beating faster as he tried to figure out where it was coming from. There it was again. The sound seemed to be coming from around the bend, past the large black rocks that marked the edge of his usual research area. Without thinking twice, Jai-Ho secured his bags and started climbing over the slippery rocks. "Hello," he called out, nearly losing his footing on the wet surface. "Is someone there?" The crying sound got louder as he made his way around the bend. There, hidden from the main beach, was a small cove he had never noticed before. The waves were stronger here, creating dangerous swirls in the water. And in the middle of those swirls, someone was struggling. Jai-Ho's training kicked in immediately. He had been a lifeguard during his undergraduate years, and those instincts never really went away. He quickly threw off his heavy jacket and boots, keeping only his wetsuit on. "Hold on," he shouted, scanning the water for the safest way to reach the person. The riptide was strong. He could see its pull in the way the water moved. He would need to swim parallel to it, not fight against it directly. Taking a deep breath, Jai-Ho dove into the cold water. The shock of it hit him hard, but he pushed through, his strong arms cutting through the waves as he swam toward the struggling figure. As he got closer, something seemed off about the person's movement. They weren't thrashing like a typical drowning victim. Their movements were more graceful, even in distress. He was just a few meters away when he got his first clear look at who he was trying to save. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing. The figure looked mostly human, but their skin had a subtle blue tint that seemed to shimmer under the water. Was he seeing things? No time to think about that now. The current was getting stronger, and whoever this was, they needed help. Jai-Ho closed the final distance between them. "I've got you," he called out, reaching for them. "Don't panic." The figure turned toward him, and Jai-Ho found himself staring into the most unusual eyes he had ever seen. They were large, with pupils that seemed to shift like liquid silver. The face was decidedly feminine, but had an otherworldly beauty to it. Small, fin-like structures flutter behind her ears. She reached for his hand, and Jai-Ho noticed the webbing between her fingers. Her grip was strong but not quite human. Her skin felt smooth, almost like dolphin skin. "The current," she gasped in perfect Korean, though her voice had an odd musical quality to it. "It's too strong, different from home." Jai-Ho pushed his shock aside. Questions could wait. "Hold on to me," he instructed, positioning himself to swim parallel to the shore. "We need to swim this way first, then angle back to the beach." She seemed to understand, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. Despite the strange situation, Jai-Ho couldn't help but notice that she seemed to know how to move in the water. Her body naturally aligned with his as they swam. It was like swimming with someone who had trained for years in the water, not a drowning victim. The journey back was tough. The riptide fought them, trying to pull them further out to sea, but Jai-Ho's knowledge of the local currents proved invaluable. Slowly but surely they made their way back to the small cove, finally reaching the shallow water where they could stand. As they stumbled onto the beach, Jiho finally got a proper look at the person he had just rescued. She was about his height, with long, silvery hair that seemed to change color like the surface of a soap bubble. Her skin was pale with that subtle blue tint he had noticed earlier, and what he had thought were odd reflections in the water turned out to be actual patterns, subtle, scale-like markings that caught the light when she moved. She was wearing something that looked like a wetsuit but seemed to be made of living material. It shifted and moved with her like a second skin. The gill-like structures behind her ears were slowly closing, becoming almost invisible. "Thank you," she said, her voice clearer now that they were out of the water. "I underestimated your planet's ocean currents. They're much stronger than what I'm used to." Jiho sat down hard on the sand, his mind reeling. "Your planet's currents," he managed to say. She smiled, revealing teeth that were just a bit too perfect, too white. "Yes, I should introduce myself properly. My name is Era, and I'm a marine researcher from Hambit." She paused, seeming to choose her next words carefully. "Which is not on Earth." Jiho looked at her, then at the ocean, then back at her again. His scientific mind was racing, trying to process what he was seeing. An alien. He had just saved an alien. An alien who looked remarkably humanoid and spoke Korean. "I'm Jiho Park," he said finally, "because what else could you say in this situation? I'm also a marine researcher, actually, though I guess my research scope has been a bit more limited than yours." Era laughed, a sound like tinkling crystals. "Perhaps not as limited as you think. Your understanding of these waters just saved my life. Our technology doesn't help much when we don't understand the basic principles of an environment." She stood up, moving with an elegant grace that seemed both familiar and alien at the same time. "I suppose I owe you an explanation. My people, the Haniul, have been studying Earth's oceans for some time now. We have a research base in the Pacific. We're particularly interested in how your marine ecosystems handle the extreme variations in conditions here. Our oceans are much more uniform." Jiho found himself nodding along, the scientist in him already fascinated despite the shocking situation. "That explains why you were having trouble with the riptide. Our currents can be treacherous even for experienced swimmers who are used to them." "Yes, I'm rather embarrassed about that," Era admitted. "I thought I could handle a simple data collection mission near the shore. I didn't account for how different the water movement would be in this area." She looked at him curiously. "You don't seem as shocked as I would expect." Jiho considered this. "Oh, I'm definitely in shock," he said with a small laugh. "But I'm also a scientist. We're trained to observe and adapt to new information, even when it seems impossible. Though I have to admit, meeting an alien researcher while collecting seaweed samples wasn't exactly how I planned to start my day." "Seaweed samples?" Era's eyes lit up with interest. "Are you studying the effects of ocean acidification on local species?" Jiho stared at her in surprise. "Yes, actually. How did you?" "It's one of the things we're most interested in studying here," she explained. "Your oceans are changing so rapidly, yet some of your marine life is showing remarkable adaptation capabilities. We have nothing like this on Hambit." As the sun rose higher in the sky, Jiho found himself engaged in one of the most fascinating scientific discussions of his life, sitting on a hidden beach with an alien marine biologist. They compared notes on ocean chemistry, marine adaptation, and the challenges of conducting research in different environments. It was only when his tablet beeped with a calendar reminder that Jiho realized how much time had passed. He had a meeting with his thesis advisor in an hour. "I have to go," he said reluctantly. "But I have so many questions." Era smiled. "Then perhaps we should meet again. There's much we could learn from each other." She reached into a small compartment in her suit and pulled out what looked like a piece of mother of pearl. "This will help you find me if you come back to this cove. Just hold it in the water." Jiho took the object carefully. It was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse slightly, like it had its own heartbeat. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Era asked, already backing toward the water. Jai-Ho looked at the strange object in his hand, then at this remarkable being who had completely changed his understanding of the universe in just a few hours. "Yes," he said firmly. "I'll be here." Era's smile widened. "Good. And Jai-Ho, thank you again for saving me. Not everyone would have done that, especially given how different I appear." With that, she dove into the waves with impossible grace, disappearing beneath the surface. Jai-Ho stood watching the water for a long moment, the piece of alien technology warm in his hand. Finally, he gathered his research samples and equipment, his mind already spinning with questions for tomorrow. As he climbed back over the rocks to the main beach, he couldn't help but smile. Somehow, he had a feeling his thesis project was about to take a very interesting turn. Jai-Ho could barely sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Era's silvery gaze and the way her skin shimmered in the morning light. The piece of alien technology she had given him sat on his bedside table, giving off a soft, pearly glow that pulsed like a gentle heartbeat. The next morning, he arrived at the beach earlier than usual. His heart was racing as he climbed over the now familiar rocks to the hidden cove. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in beautiful colors. He pulled the pearl-like object from his pocket and walked to the water's edge. Following Era's instructions, he knelt down and held it in the shallow waves. The effect was immediate. The object began to pulse faster, and the water around it started to glow with a soft blue light. Within minutes, he saw a familiar figure gliding through the water toward the shore. Era emerged from the waves as gracefully as she had disappeared into them yesterday. Today, her suit seemed to shimmer with different colors, adapting to the morning light. "You came back," she said, smiling. Her voice still carried that musical quality that made it sound both foreign and beautiful. "Of course I did," Jai-Ho replied. "I have about 1,000 questions for you." Era laughed. "I have many questions for you too. Would you like to see something amazing?" When Jai-Ho nodded, she reached into another hidden compartment in her suit and pulled out what looked like 2 small shells. "These are breathing filters," she explained. "They'll let you stay underwater with me for several hours. Would you like to see how we conduct our research?" Jai-Ho stared at the shells in amazement. "Are they safe for humans?" "We've tested them extensively," Era assured him. "We've been studying your species for quite some time, though we rarely interact directly." After a moment's hesitation, Jai-Ho took one of the shells. Under Era's guidance, he placed it against his neck, just below his ear. The shell seemed to melt slightly, attaching itself to his skin. It felt warm but not uncomfortable. "Ready?" Era asked, extending her hand. Jai-Ho took it, noting again the slight webbing between her fingers. Together, they walked into the water. When they were deep enough, Era pulled him under the surface. Jai-Ho's first instinct was to hold his breath, but Era squeezed his hand reassuringly. He forced himself to relax, and to his amazement, he could breathe normally. The water flowing through the shell-like filter felt natural, as if he'd been breathing this way all his life. Era led him deeper into the ocean, and Jai-Ho's eyes widened as he saw the underwater world in a way he never had before. The filter seemed to enhance his vision too. Everything was crystal clear, and he could see details he'd never noticed during his previous dives. They swam for about 20 minutes before reaching what looked like a small research station anchored to the ocean floor. It was partially hidden by natural rock formations, but Jai-Ho could see the advanced technology built into its structure. The whole thing seemed to be made of the same living material as Era's suit. Inside the station, they entered an air-filled chamber where they could talk normally. "This is one of our smaller observation posts," Era explained. "We have them positioned around various coastlines to monitor marine life and ocean conditions." Jai-Ho looked around in wonder at the strange instruments and floating holographic displays. "This is incredible," he breathed. "The technology you have, it's beyond anything I could have imagined." "Technology isn't everything," Era said, pulling up what looked like a three-dimensional map of ocean currents. Yesterday proved that. All our advanced equipment didn't help me understand the dangerous currents near your shore. Your local knowledge was more valuable than any of our sensors. They spent the next few hours sharing their research. Ji-ho explained his work on ocean acidification and its effects on local marine life, while Era showed him how the Haniel monitored global ocean patterns. She seemed particularly interested in his practical experience with Earth's marine ecosystems. Our oceans on Hanbit are very different, she explained as they examined data together. They're much more stable, with fewer variations in temperature and chemistry. That's why Earth's oceans fascinate us so much. The way life here adapts to such extreme changes. It's remarkable. As they talked, Ji-ho noticed something interesting about the way Ara described things. You keep saying we and us. Are there many more Handul researchers here on Earth? Ara nodded. We have a main research base deep in the Pacific Ocean. There are about 200 researchers stationed there, studying different aspects of Earth's marine environments. 200. Ji-ho was amazed. How have you managed to stay hidden all this time? Our technology helps us stay undetected, Era explained. But mostly, we're very careful. We believe it's important to study other worlds without interfering with their natural development. She paused, looking at him with those silvery eyes. Though I suppose I've already broken that rule by revealing ourselves to you. Why did you? Ji-ho asked. You could have just thanked me for the rescue and disappeared. Era was quiet for a moment. Because of how you reacted, she said finally. You didn't hesitate to help me, even when you could see I wasn't human. And afterward, your first response wasn't fear or disbelief. It was scientific curiosity. That's rare. They spent the rest of the morning talking about their respective worlds. Era told him about Hanbit, with its 3 moons and vast crystal-clear oceans. She described cities built in harmony with the water, where her people lived both above and below the surface. In return, Ji-ho shared stories about growing up near the ocean in Korea, his journey to becoming a marine biologist, and his dreams of helping protect Earth's marine ecosystems. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, they knew it was time to return to shore. The swim back was more relaxed than their journey out, and Ji-ho found himself getting used to moving through the water with the breathing filter. Back on the beach, Era showed him how to remove the filter safely. Keep it, she said when he tried to return it. It's tuned to your biology now. It wouldn't work for anyone else anyway. Will I see you again tomorrow? Ji-ho asked, trying not to sound too eager. Era's expression turned serious. Ji-ho, I need to tell you something. The reason I was in that cove yesterday, I was actually collecting data on some unusual seismic activity we've detected. Our instruments are picking up concerning patterns. Ji-ho frowned. What kind of patterns? We're not sure yet, but they're centered near our main research base. I'm supposed to return there soon to help analyze the data. She looked at him thoughtfully. Would you be willing to help us? Your knowledge of local geological patterns could be valuable. Ji-ho didn't hesitate. Of course I'll help. Just tell me what you need. Era's smile returned. Meet me here tomorrow at the same time. Bring any data you have on local seismic activity and underwater geological formations. I have a feeling we're going to need it. As they parted ways, Ji-ho watched Ara disappear into the waves once again. He touched the breathing filter that was now safely in his pocket, still hardly believing everything that had happened. In just 2 days, his whole world had expanded beyond anything he could have imagined. Walking back to his apartment, he began mentally reviewing everything he knew about underwater seismic activity in the region. Whatever was happening at the Haniel research base, he was determined to help. After all, how often does a marine biology graduate student get the chance to help an alien research team? Little did he know, this was just the beginning of an adventure that would change not only his life, but the relationship between 2 worlds. The next morning dawned gray and stormy. Ji-ho arrived at the cove with his waterproof tablet, filled with geological data and maps of the ocean floor. The waves were rougher than usual, crashing against the rocks with unusual force. When he held the pearl-like object in the water, it pulsed with a rapid, almost worried rhythm. Era emerged from the waves moments later, her expression tense. "Something's wrong," she said as soon as she reached the shore. "Our base's communication systems are down, and the seismic readings have gotten much worse." Jai-Ho pulled up his data. "I've been studying the patterns you mentioned. There's been a series of small earthquakes along this fault line." He showed her the map on his tablet. "They're getting stronger and more frequent." Era's silver eyes widened as she looked at his data. "This matches our readings exactly, but you've mapped the whole pattern of the fault line. We only had readings from our immediate area." She looked at him with new respect. This could be crucial information. Suddenly, the pearl-like object in Jai-Ho's hand began to vibrate violently. Era grabbed it, her face paling to an almost white shade. "That's an emergency signal. The base, it's in serious trouble." "What do we need to do?" Jai-Ho asked, already gathering his things. "I need to get back there immediately," Era said. "But with the communications down in these currents..." She looked at the rough ocean with worry. Jai-Ho studied the waves, then checked his tablet again. "The storm is affecting the surface currents, but I know a deeper channel that should be calmer. My research vessel is docked nearby. We could use it to get closer to your base's location." Era hesitated. "Using human technology to reach our base, it's not exactly allowed. Neither is revealing yourself to humans," Jai-Ho pointed out. "Sometimes we need to break rules to save lives." After a moment's thought, Era nodded. "You're right. Let's hurry." 20 minutes later, they were aboard Jai-Ho's small research vessel. It wasn't fancy, but it was well maintained and equipped with good sonar equipment. As they navigated through the stormy waters, Jai-Ho kept one eye on his instruments and another on the weather radar. "The channel should be just ahead," he said, adjusting their course. "Once we're in deeper water, the surface storm won't affect us as much." Era stood next to him in the cabin, her suit now glowing with faint patterns that pulsed in sync with the emergency beacon. "The base is about 15 kilometers southeast of here, at a depth of 300 meters. Jai-Ho checked his sonar readings. "There's a deep trench in that direction." "Is that where?" "Yes," Era confirmed. "We positioned the base along the trench wall. It gave us good access to different depth zones for our research." As they approached the location, the ship's instruments began picking up strange readings. The water temperature was fluctuating wildly, and the sonar showed unusual disturbances in the trench. "This isn't good," Jai-Ho muttered, studying the data. "These patterns, it looks like there's significant geological activity along the trench wall. If your base is anchored there, it could be destabilizing." Era finished, her voice tight with worry. "We need to get down there." Jai-Ho engaged the ship's autopilot to hold their position. "Will the breathing filter work at that depth?" "Yes, it can handle much deeper," Era assured him. "But are you sure you want to come? It could be dangerous." Jai-Ho was already putting on his wetsuit. "You might need my help. Besides, how many humans get to see an alien research base?" Despite the serious situation, Era smiled. "You're very brave, Jai-Ho Park." They dove into the water together. The breathing filter activated automatically, and Jai-Ho felt his vision adjust to the darkness as they descended. Era's suit began to glow brighter, providing light as they went deeper. The water got colder and darker as they swam down along the trench wall. Jai-Ho could feel subtle vibrations in the water. Something was definitely wrong with the geological structure here. Finally, they saw it. The Haniel research base was larger than Jai-Ho had imagined, built into the trench wall like a giant sea anemone made of living metal and crystal. But parts of it were clearly damaged, with sections of the wall behind it showing signs of recent movement. "The primary support anchors are failing," Era said, her voice coming clearly through some function of the breathing filter. The seismic activity must have weakened their connection points. They swam closer, and Ji-ho could see other Hanyul researchers swimming around the base, trying to stabilize different sections. Their suits glowed with various colors, probably indicating their different roles or ranks. Suddenly, there was a deep rumbling sound. Ji-ho felt the water vibrate around them as a cloud of silt burst up from below. The trench wall was shifting. Everyone inside. Someone shouted in that same musical language. The structure can't take another shock like that. Era pulled Ji-ho toward an entrance. Inside, the base was a maze of corridors that seemed to be made of the same living material as their suits. Emergency lights pulsed along the walls, and Ji-ho could hear the structure groaning under stress. They made their way to what appeared to be a control room. Other Hanyul turned to stare at Ji-ho, but no one questioned his presence. They had more urgent problems. The main support anchor is down to 23% stability, one of them reported. If we lose it completely, the whole base will slide into the trench. Ji-ho studied the holographic displays, showing the base's structure and its relationship to the trench wall. Something about the pattern of stress points looked familiar. "Wait," he said, stepping forward. "This is similar to something we saw during a submarine landslide study last year." He pulled out his tablet and brought up some old research data. The pressure isn't evenly distributed. If we can redirect the force along these points. He pointed to specific areas on the hologram. The Hanyul engineers looked at his data, then at their own readings. "He's right," one of them said. "If we reconfigure the secondary anchors to these positions, it could stabilize the whole structure. But the geological instability is still increasing," another pointed out. "Even if we stabilize the base now, we'd need to move it soon." Ji-ho looked at the seismic data again. "Not necessarily. Look at the pattern of these tremors. They're not random. They're following the fault line in a specific sequence. If I'm right, once this series of shocks passes, this area should actually be more stable than before." Era translated his explanation for those who didn't speak Korean. There was a quick discussion, and then the base commander, a tall Hanyul with elaborately patterned skin, gave an order. The next hour was intense. Ji-ho worked with the Hanyul engineers, using his knowledge of Earth's geological patterns to help them reposition their anchoring system. Every few minutes, another tremor would shake the base, but each time the new configuration held a little better. Finally, after what seemed like forever, the tremors began to decrease. The base's instruments showed the new anchor positions were holding steady, and the stress on the structure was reducing. "It's working," Era said, relief clear in her voice. "The base is stabilizing." The commander approached Ji-ho and spoke in careful Korean. "You have done us a great service today. Your understanding of Earth's geological patterns saved not only our base, but potentially many lives." Ji-ho bowed slightly, remembering his manners even in this strange situation. "I'm just glad I could help." "Perhaps," the commander said, "it is time we reconsidered some of our policies about interaction with humans." He looked meaningfully at Ara, who seemed to stand a little straighter. As the crisis passed and the base began its recovery operations, Ji-ho found himself looking around in amazement at everything he had just been part of. Here he was, standing in an alien research base deep under the ocean, having just helped save it using his knowledge of Earth's geology. "Ready to head back?" Era asked, touching his arm gently. Ji-ho nodded, but he couldn't help asking, "Will I be allowed to come back?" The commander, who was still nearby, answered for her. "We will need to discuss many things in the coming days. It seems we have much to learn from each other." As they prepared to leave the base, Ji-ho took one last look around. Somehow, he had a feeling this was just the beginning of something much bigger than a chance rescue on a quiet beach. A week had passed since the crisis at the underwater base. Ji-ho sat in his small apartment, staring at the breathing filter on his desk. Sometimes he wondered if he had dreamed the whole thing, but the alien technology sitting there proved it was all real. He hadn't seen Era since they had returned from the base. The commander had asked him to wait for a formal contact, saying they needed time to discuss recent events with their leadership. Jae-ho understood, but he missed their morning conversations about marine biology. He was working on his thesis when the pearl-like communicator began to pulse with a new pattern, steady and formal somehow, unlike its usual rhythm. Jae-ho grabbed his research bag and headed for the cove immediately. When he arrived, he found not just Era waiting for him, but 3 other Handuel as well. They stood on the beach in their shimming suits, looking both alien and elegant in the morning light. Jae-ho recognized the base commander among them. "Jae-ho Park," the commander said, stepping forward. "Thank you for coming." Era smiled at him encouragingly. She looked different today. Her suit had new patterns that seemed more formal, and she wore what looked like decorative pieces that shifted color in the sunlight. "We have spent the past week in communication with our council on Hanbit," the commander continued. "What happened at our base has led to many discussions about our policy of non-interaction with Earth species." One of the other Handuel, an older-looking one with intricate patterns across their face, spoke next. "For centuries, we have watched and studied other worlds from a distance. We believe this was the wisest course, but sometimes wisdom can be found in unexpected places." The commander nodded. "You have shown us something important. When you saved Ara, you did not hesitate despite her obvious differences. When our base was in danger, you risked your own safety to help us. And most importantly, you showed us that there is value in combining our knowledge rather than just observing from afar." Jae-ho listened carefully, trying to stay calm despite his racing heart. "I just did what anyone would do," he said. Era made a musical sound that might have been a laugh. "But that's just it. Not everyone would have done what you did. We've been watching humans for a long time. Your reaction was special." The older Handuel stepped forward. "I am Han, Chief Science Officer of our Earth Observation Program. We have a proposal for you, Jae-ho Park." Jae-ho straightened up, trying to look professional despite standing on a beach in his everyday clothes. "We would like to offer you a position as the first human ambassador to Hanbit," Han said. Jae-ho's mouth fell open. "Ambassador? Me?" The commander held up a hand. "Not a political ambassador, a scientific one. We believe it's time to establish a proper exchange of knowledge between our peoples, starting with the field we both care about most, marine science. We want to set up a joint research program," Era explained, her eyes shining with excitement. "Combining your practical knowledge of Earth's oceans with our technology. You would split your time between Earth and Hanbit, helping us understand your world better while learning about ours. Of course, this would need to remain confidential for now," Han added. "We're not ready for full public contact, but it would be a first step toward greater cooperation between our worlds." Jae-ho's mind was spinning with possibilities. "What about my PhD program?" "We've thought about that," Era said. "Your research would become part of the program. We can provide you with data and resources that would make your thesis on ocean acidification more comprehensive than anything currently possible on Earth." "Though we suspect," the commander added with what might have been a smile, "that your thesis topic might expand somewhat once you see our facilities on Hanbit." Jae-ho looked at each of them, then out at the ocean that suddenly seemed both familiar and full of new possibilities. "When would this start?" "We would begin with short visits to Hanbit," Han explained. "A few days at first, then longer periods as you adjust. Era would be your liaison, helping you adapt to our world. Our transportation technology makes the journey relatively quick," Era added, "though you might find it unusual at first." The fourth Handuel, who had been quiet until now, stepped forward and opened what looked like a living metal case. Inside was a suit similar to the ones they wore, but sized for a human. "This would be yours," the commander said. "It's been specially designed for human biology, while incorporating our technology. It will let you move freely in any ocean environment on either world." Jae-ho reached out to touch the suit. It felt warm and somehow alive under his fingers. "This is incredible," he whispered. "There's more," Era said. She pulled out another device, similar to the pearl-like communicator, but more complex. "This will give you access to our research databases, everything we know about Earth's oceans, and all our data about marine life on Hambit. We should warn you," Han said seriously. "This won't be easy. You'll be the first human to visit another world, the first to study alien marine ecosystems. There will be challenges we haven't even thought of yet." Jaiho looked at the suit, then at the database device, then at Era's encouraging smile. He thought about all the nights he'd spent dreaming about discovering something new in the ocean's depths. Now he was being offered the chance to study oceans on another world. "When do we start?" he asked. The relief and happiness on their faces was clear, even on their alien features. The commander stepped forward and placed a hand on Jaiho's shoulder. "Welcome to the program, Ambassador Park." They spent the next hour discussing details. Jaiho would need to rearrange his university schedule, but the Hanuel had already figured out ways to make his research trips look like normal marine biology fieldwork. They gave him devices to help him communicate with their base and with Era, and started teaching him the basics of their technology. As the others prepared to leave, Era stayed behind for a moment. "Are you scared?" she asked. Jaiho considered the question carefully. "Yes," he admitted, "but in a good way. The way you feel when you're about to discover something amazing." Era's smile was radiant. "That's exactly how I felt when I first came to Earth." She touched the sleeve of his new suit. "The oceans of Hanbit are beautiful. I can't wait to show them to you." "I still can't believe this all started because you got caught in a riptide," Jaiho said, shaking his head. "Maybe it was meant to happen," Era suggested. "After all, how else would we have discovered that the best way to understand a world isn't just to study it from afar, but to reach out and connect with its people?" As they stood there on the beach where they'd first met, Jaiho looked out at the ocean with new eyes. Somewhere out there was another world with different oceans, different life, and endless new things to discover. And he was going to be the first human to study them. "Thank you," he said suddenly, "for trusting me with all of this." Era's answer was simple but perfect. "Thank you for diving in to save a stranger, even when that stranger turned out to be an alien." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, they began planning his first trip to Hambit. Jaiho knew his life would never be the same, but he couldn't wait to begin this new adventure. Sometimes, the greatest rewards come not from seeking them out, but from simply helping others when they need it most.